Thank you so much for coming. I'm Deborah Davidson, Director and Founder of Catalyst Conversations. I'm happy to welcome you to a Catalyst Conversation. I want to thank the LIST Visual Arts Center for hosting and presenting this program with us. And I want to thank in particular Paul Ha and Emily Garner for their continued generosity. Thanks to Cambridge Arts Council, our founding partner, our board, and all of our volunteers who help us out, and to those of you who have donated recently. Catalyst Conversations was founded to open a critical path for dialogue between the arts and sciences. We present intimate and provocative conversations between artists, scientists, and the public. We are interested in connecting the two through programs, educational outreach, and public events like this, which demonstrate the important conversation and synergy between art, science, and technology. We would like to dedicate this evening's program, Eyes Open, Deep Looking and Thinking, to the memory of George Fifield, someone who was larger than life in all ways and touched so many of us in all ways. He was an early supporter of and participant in Catalyst, and he will be sorely missed. Our speakers will introduce us to Visual Thinking Strategies, or VTS, a research-based methodology for holding open, rigorous discussions about art and other complex materials. Originally developed for museums and schools, VTS is now applied to many sectors internationally, including healthcare and business. Dr. Joel Katz, who first brought this approach to medical education, and Dabney Hailey, an expert VTS trainer, will be our guides. They will demonstrate how this approach manifests psychological safety and collaboration, metacognition and bias mitigation, and comfort with ambiguity, all key to improving patient care, increasing diagnostic accuracy, and conducting research. Dabby will facilitate a VTS discussion about one work of art from the current exhibition here at the LIST, Symbionts, Contemporary Artists in the Biosphere, guiding us into deep observation, listening, and thinking. Joel will steward our reflections on the experience, connecting the skills and mindsets developed by VTS training to effective clinical practice, medical education, and more. You'll learn how this approach is applied at Harvard Medical School and affiliated hospitals, and why leveraging the visual arts can transform medicine. Joel Katz is a former biomedical illustrator who has championed the use of visual arts to improve patient care and health professions education. An infectious disease consultant and vice chair for education at Brigham and Women's Hospital. He holds the Marshall Wolf Distinguished Chair in Medical Education at Harvard's Medical School. 20 years ago, he co-founded the ongoing course, Training the Eye, Improving the Art of Physical Diagnosis, which brought visual thinking strategies into medical education. Dabney Hailey spent more than a decade as a curator and expert visual thinking strategies facilitator in museums, and became a pioneer in applying the method in business and higher ed. She was the Gruber 66 curator at the Wellesley College Davis Museum and director of academic programs at Brandeis University's Rose Art Museum. In 2014, she founded Hailey Group, a consultancy that catalyzes innovation, leadership, and team communication through VTS training and application. So with that, Dabney will give us a short history of VTS, and we'll continue.
Great. Actually, I'm going to hand it over to Joel
Okay,
first.
great.
Yeah.
Does the speaker work? Yep. Okay, fabulous. I think I'm going to stand up, if that's okay. I have a bad back, and so I can't sit for long periods of time. So it's not that I'm running away, I'm just wandering. I want to thank you for inviting Dabney and I. We're both so honored to be here. And I think we will lead you through what we hope will be a very interactive hour here. And that means you're going to have work to do. There's time for discussion, and then there's time for reflection. And those will only work if you are actively participating. So we appreciate that. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm not sure that I was the first one to introduce VTS into medical education, but I've been doing it for about 20 years, so I've certainly been around. My own course, briefly, as you heard, is that I'm a physician primarily, but I started out as a graphic designer and artist before I went to, it was sort of a backdoor into medical school in some sort of way. And when I entered my internship, I asked another colleague of mine, of which there are many at Harvard who are artists themselves, how would we ever bring these together? And he said, I don't know, but it'll happen. And then fast forward 10 years, students approached me and asked me if I would be willing to try and creatively think about how to improve the curriculum through the arts. And so it seems a perfect fit for this Catalyst series of how do art and science intersect. And Dabney is an expert in the methodology we use, and I really love watching her do it. Where's the slide? You got slide control?
Yeah.
So this is a painting, many of you may know, by Picasso. It's very non-Picasso-esque that we think of, and he did this, I think, when he was studying to enter the academy in Spain, and it's a very kind of a classical painting. And the title of this painting is Science and Charity. Science and Charity. And it was happening at a time that biomedicine was making vast advances. The Koch had discovered the theory of microbiology, and Pasteur had applied it to effective uses of vaccines. And for the first time, medicine actually had something they could offer. But it also happened at the time that physicians were beginning to start to think about specialization as an economic tool, if you will. And that's gone to extreme levels right now. And in this painting, he captures the patient in the middle, and on her left is the charity piece of it. The nun, caring, attentive, signs of hope, nice, fresh pink skin. And on her right, the pallid, almost lifeless doctor, and holding, checking the pulse, staring away from the patient. And it's a kind of a unintentional but beautiful illustration of one of the problems in medicine is this distance between patient and doctor. And that is one of the areas we apply this methodology to. And I, as a medical educator, the challenge I come in with is what are the deficits that we need to teach our students and how do we do it? And when it comes to pharmacology, art's not going to be very helpful. And when it comes to surgical technique, art is mildly impactful. But when it comes to things like this, humanism, communication, wellness, observation, diagnosis, art can be very useful. Jerry Berg, who was a nurse who pioneered this a long time ago, wrote a book about this topic, and she said it is precisely because art is so richly complex that our possibilities from learning from it are endless, which I think is a very nice summary. And what I encourage people in science and in medicine to do is to think about what are the needs and then step back and say, how can art address those needs? And we're going to go through a few of those. Art can be effective in many ways as a tool in education. And I would say that the methodology that we're going to hear about, VTS, from Dabney, was developed actually for the education of elementary students, is my understanding.
Adults, actually.
I'm sorry?
It was both.
And young adults, okay.
It was
And
both
adults.
and children.
But we have found it to be particularly and surprisingly useful in the Harvard Medical School curriculum and at the residency level and at the faculty level and in the arena of multidisciplinary education. And these are some of the reasons why. Regardless of your background and training, art addresses universal concerns. It is simultaneously emotional and intellectual, going back to that Picasso painting, and it forces people who are overly intellectual to recognize the emotional piece, and it forces people who are maybe leaning towards the emotional end to recognize the intellectual pieces of it. There is a story, just like with patients, to art, and it has a place in history, and every patient that we meet, every patient every medical student meets, same way, is entering the exam room with a story, and they're at some point in that story. This is a key one, is that art is inherently ambiguous. And there is this draw, this temptation to try and box people into a single diagnosis, whereas in reality, the situation is rarely dichotomous and so simple. And art really gives you a chance to release preconceptions, if you will, and accept the importance of not locking in on a single diagnosis. And art is a perfectly ambiguous mode to do that. It takes health professionals out of their comfort zone, and I am a physician, but we do this with nurses, with physical therapists, with social workers, physicians, medical students. And getting them out of their comfort zone is critically important. There is so much pressure in medical school, for example, where I do much of this, to have the right answer. And somehow when they're on the wards, they feel judged, highly judged, and it's hard for them to open up. Whereas if they're in the art museum, 4 blocks away from the Brigham, they can escape preconceptions of what they should or shouldn't be. They can distance their own inhibitions, and somehow the junior-most person on the team is suddenly doing all the talking, where in the hospital, 4 blocks away, they would be silent as a stone. And it minimizes anxiety. Viewers start with what they know and can always find more. And so this idea that I don't know enough, this imposter syndrome, I need to know more, I'm not capable of doing this, they can practice that and learn that they know more than they think they know, and they can find more even if they think they know everything. And then finally, and again, back to the Picasso painting, it narrows the gap between bioscience and human experience. When we take our residents to the art museum, and then the next day they come back to the hospital, suddenly they have something to talk to their patients about, because their patients were also at the art museum. And I'm going to hand it over to Dabney to tell you about one of the main methodology we use.
Yeah, so we teach within the course that I now have the privilege of teaching with Joel and our other partners in it, training the eye, improving the art of physical diagnosis. All of the pictures you've seen so far until this slide were our students at the MFA over the last couple of years. This is the methodology we lean into the most. It comes from art museums. I will not go into the full background of VTS because I don't have time. And there's a lot of great research and storytelling behind it and within it. But there were 2 founders. One was Philip Yanowin, who was the director of education at the Museum of Modern Art from the late 80s into the early 90s, and Abigail Housen, a Cantabrigian who passed during COVID, we miss her, a cognitive psychologist. The 2 of them met in the mid to late 80s and realized through a lot of really interesting research and practice that people at the Museum of Modern Art who attended their programs were not learning very much. They weren't growing at all in their thinking about art, although they were having a really good time, and they enjoyed, and they became attached to the museum. And I don't want to, that's a very important component of what those programs do, and a lot of programs do. But they weren't changing in their thinking very much, and they didn't feel very empowered as viewers. So, and there was more to it than that. But Abigail and Philip set out to try to create a way to invite discussion. And what I find particularly rich about what they ended up with, it took about 10 years to take the form that Joel and I teach. It was a long road. But what I think is particularly rich about it is this balance between it being really rigorous cognitively, that people are asked to think very deeply. And at the same time, everybody in a VTS discussion knows and feels that they're valued and they belong there. Right? And that's a lovely thing to sort of balance between. They also designed it as a routine, for it to be routine, meaning to be used again and again, and to be for people to grow developmentally over time. Right? And there's a lot of constructivist philosophy underlying VTS, if anybody is an educator. Vygotsky was really important to them. So all 3 of those aspects of VTS have made it really rigorous and profoundly applicable across a lot of different environments. So Joel and I do it with medical students, and I use VTS across the business world and in higher ed. But why? Okay. So I won't spend too much time on this slide. Joel, you've just referred to a lot of this, but to name it a little bit differently. VTS over time, not in one session, but over time, develops critical thinking skills. And we like to name those. And Joel just did some, like, make more observations, use very precise language to describe what we think we're seeing, hold other perspectives as possible simultaneously, using evidence-based reasoning, and persisting, revising our thinking. And that's related to comfort with ambiguity, which you just talked about. And bias mitigation, too, meaning that we become more self-aware. We're thinking about our own thinking. We're metacognating. And in that, we might notice, oh, I have a particular lens. There could be more. Maybe this isn't the best lens, right? Or maybe I'm being stereotypic. Also, psychological safety and collaboration can be built up over time through VTS. And I'm referring to the work of Amy Edmondson there, in case anyone's familiar with that. And empathic communication. So all of these skills and eventually mindsets can be supported and over time built up through VTS. And then they show up outside VTS, which I think is the most profound implication of this. And back to you, Joel.
Yeah.
And actually, I'll hold on to this.
You keep that.
Yeah.
So how can we use this in the medical world, which is where I live? And these are a few examples, not exhaustive in any way, and new ideas come up all the time. And I'd be curious in our discussion if people have other suggestions of things we should be doing. One of the ones we spend a lot of time on is team building. Our accreditation organizations require that we teach teamwork, and yet there is no way to measure teamwork or to really teach it in a standardized way. So we've taken this challenge and we've taken it over to the Art Museum, and we actually bring our full team of students, residents, attendings, nurses, physical therapists, ward clerks, everyone on the team. We move them over to the Art Museum one day a month, and we engage in activities that address hierarchy and communication that are transformative for these teams. It's really amazing. Self-awareness is a huge one, and I'm going to get to Dabney's point on mitigating bias. We focus a lot on helping students recognize their own patterns of thought and their own patterns of communication that often, in fact always I would say, reflect hidden unconscious bias. And by practicing at the museum, it allows people to be more facile with it, be more aware of it, be less defensive about it, and hopefully start to shift their self-awareness. To navigate ambiguity, as mentioned, and that is a critical piece of diagnosis, and we have a course that we co-teach on physical diagnosis, and a piece of that is how does diagnosis of the patient depend on observations. And we actually do exercises in the museum, and then a week later we take them and see patients. And we use exactly the same methodology that you're about to engage in with Dabney. We prep the patients ahead of time. And it's remarkable how much students can learn from that. The issue of psychological safety is critical, and these types of courses are very effective at addressing those issues. And then the issue of sort of self-empathy and public empathy, again, we have a humanistic curriculum, one session of which occurs at the MFA or the Gardner Museum. And to get back to these thoughts, how do these relate? Listening deeply, paraphrasing what other people say, reframe them, but identify the ambiguity, the unknowns, the questions that are in the statements people make. Suspending judgment, appreciating multiple perspectives, seeking evidence. Why do you say that? What is it that makes you come to that conclusion? And then being humble.
Okay, so we're finally going to look at art now, all right? And before we do, I always like to introduce these questions every time I do VTS as an introduction. We're just going to dip our toes in the waters of this method. I think these are very powerful questions. They come from Linda Hill, who is the head of the Leadership Institute at Harvard Business School. And they're important for physicians. They're important for every single person who works with other people, actually, in any way. How do those people experience you is one of the questions. And it's not what do you think of yourself as you're moving through your professional life or your personal life, but how are you actually experienced in real time? And related to that, how do those people that you work with experience themselves as you work with them day to day? Do they experience themselves as able to make a mistake, as heard and understood, as able to ask a question? Do they experience themselves as needing to have a nice, neat, pat, right answer before they'll talk, right? Or needing to wait to be told what to do? We will ask you to think about these questions after we do VTS, and you'll apply them to me and yourself, right? Joel will ask you, how did you experience yourself during that discussion, and how did you experience Dabney? And they relate to all sorts of work that we do in the Training the Eye course in terms of how might a patient be experiencing your healthcare team as you're moving through your work. Okay, so now we're going to look at art, and I just want to say a couple things. I'm going to try to see everybody and welcome your comments. There's no particular experience required with art or anything else with science to take part in this conversation, so I welcome all kinds of thinking. I don't have a particular end game in mind for this discussion we're about to have. For me, the process of thinking hard together and looking deeply is the purpose of what we're doing when we do VTS. You're a big group, which is great. VTS is designed for a slightly smaller group, so unfortunately I won't be able to hear from everybody, but I will try, okay, to hear from as many people as possible. And if you'll raise your hand, Joel and Sarah, lovely Sarah Baker, this is Sarah, they're going to pass around mics for you. But the way that we begin VTS is actually quietly. So here's our work of art from the exhibition, and this is from a larger series, but we're just going to look at this one piece, get to know it. The way we always start is quietly. Just take a moment to look. Thank you. Thank you again. So what's going on in this work of art? You can just raise your hand to start. Yes.
There's a relationship between, nature and the human.
All right, so thinking about a potential big theme, the relationships between humans and nature. And what do you see that makes you say human and nature?
The animal in the face and the connectivity through the lines, the gesture of the painting going between them.
Okay. Okay, great, thank you. So two figures you're seeing. One looks to be human, the other an animal. And you're looking at what seems to be a kind of connective material between the two, maybe drawing or the material of the art. So made you wonder about maybe that's a theme of that relationship between humans and nature. Thank you. What more can we find? Yes. No.
It's a $1 bill. It's a $1 bill in some currency.
Okay, so you're seeing currency. You called it a dollar bill. And what do you see in the work of art that makes you say it could be a dollar bill?
It says a 1 and it spells it out.
Right here.
In English.
Okay, so you're looking at this particular, the word here, one, and the fact that it's spelled out, and it's reminding you of a dollar bill, of another place where you've seen a one look that way. So you're thinking about currency. Thank you. What more can we find?
There seem to be a lot of equivalent shapes going on, from microscopic paramecium hair-like to human hair-like to organic plant. We've got kind of eye shapes. We've got acorn-like shapes. And then this almost looks like a satellite from space view of Earth and land as well. So a massive different scale.
I think I'm getting some feedback here. Okay, thank you. So noticing other aspects of the work of art, you're looking at the details across the picture and thinking about different scales of image making or different perspectives. One all the way thinking about being aerial almost or out of space and looking down at Earth. Others microscopic, so a huge range that you're finding. You noted acorns too, and some natural materials like leaves. And what do you see that makes you say both aerial, that big view, and then microscopic specifically in the picture?
Well, I just think there's a resonance between the textures. You know, I'm familiar with what microscopic things look like and things from space, and there's some equivalencies in that.
Okay, so drawing on thinking about microscopic imagery, and you're remembering and connecting with that, and also thinking about looking at
Yeah,
landscape from really far
similar
away.
in patterning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so patterns and textures.
Yes.
Are drawing. Thank you. What more can we find? Yes.
So I was just noticing that they kind of look alike. They sort of have the same shaped nose, and the hair is kind of the same. And the human seems to be looking at the chipmunk, maybe, and the chipmunk's looking out at us.
Great, thank you.
And
So,
I also just kind of wondered about, like, the acorns and the color. I sort of found myself wondering, is that ink that's made from acorns, maybe?
this color here, is that what you're
brown.
referring to?
Mhm.
All right, so a few things there. Looking closely at the two figures and kind of connected, and we've wondered about human and animal, and maybe a theme arising there about their relationship. And you're finding some sort of correspondences, or the noses look the same to you. You're thinking about gaze. The human seems to be looking at the animal, and you're pondering, is the animal bringing up us, kind of meeting our gaze as the viewers? And then this color. You're wondering where that comes from, the origin of it, and connecting it to the acorns. And what do you see that makes you say it could be made from acorns?
Somehow I just think that I've seen acorns in a bucket with a kind of a reddish brown color, but I don't know.
Okay. Okay, so drawing on your own memory, a loose memory, or thinking about the
Leaves,
the
maybe.
pigment or
Yeah.
color of acorns, and this for you, those two seem to be connected. These shapes here and that color seem to relate to acorns. Thank you. What more can we find? Actually, if you could just pass it back, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I just noticed that the plants are growing out of his head. And so on the top, they're coming up, on the side, they're kind of going down. So it's almost like his head is the earth, or the ground.
Okay. And there was also a correspondence, somebody was noticing the hair here, and I didn't see it, and over here. So looking along this, is this the line you're talking
Yeah,
about?
that's the one. I mean, the plants that have kind of leaves on them, they all stem from the surface of his head. And so they're perpendicular. They start out perpendicular to the surface, which makes me think they're growing out of his head.
Okay. So this seems to, his head seems to also be kind of earth or soil with plants growing out of it because of that verticality. And you see it running along the whole contour there. Thank you. What more can we find? And then I'll come over here.
Well, I was immediately drawn to the eyes in both figures, and the only thing I could sense is the difference between seeing and being seen, and what that dynamic might be feeling like and looking like, and what the experience is like. And I didn't get really beyond that to try to, make a narrative out of it, just that dynamic of seeing and being seen.
Okay, so we were just remarking on wondering about where the human gaze might be directed to the animal and the animal out of at us. And the eyes are really holding a lot of import for you too. That's where your attention is going. And you're thinking about maybe one standing for seeing and the other for being seen. And what do you see that makes you say that for each one? Was it which one was which? Oh, what do you see that makes you say that one is seen and one is being seen?
Well, I think the figure on the left is looking directly at the animal figure on the right, and the figure on the right, the eyes are looking out like almost in either fear or concern or uncertainty. I mean, I could read into a lot of the dynamics, but that's what I was drawn to, is the eyes.
Okay, so also kind of thinking about awareness of someone looking, a figure being in the act of seeing and then being looked at or being seen. And for you, there may be a little bit of emotional quality of tension or anxiety in the figure of the animal, which is the one being looked at. Thank you. Wait, over here, and then I'll come back over there. What more can we find?
I was looking at what I think of as 3 different kinds of mark making. So there's the printed stencil of the letters and numbers, and then the graphite hand drawing, and then the sort of mystery pigment substance, which is much more kind of organic, and it looks like maybe there was some kind of water that was involved in making that shape. So there's sort of 3 different levels of control being enacted. And so some of it was probably really in the artist's control, and then some of it was probably more kind of the chance of the process.
Thank you. So thinking about both materiality and process, that this was made by someone. And you're noticing, you said sort of stamps. So one kind of image making here, the drawing or graphite, we've just with the acorns and the other aspects, the drawings of the figures. And then we were wondering earlier about that kind of range between a microscopic and a very macro view for this other part, and did it relate to nature like the acorns? And you're thinking now about the control of that material and how different the way it seems to be laid down versus the other 2 modes of image making that make you say that. So what do you see about it that makes you say it shows less control? And you called it a mystery material too.
I think that's in part because someone else was mentioning satellite imagery, and on hearing that, I thought, oh, I guess that could be some sort of photographic process that did that, but I am a watercolorist, so I was like, that looks like somebody made that with water and pigment and sort of put water into that, and that I know that that's how that behaves, but it could be a different process as well. So it just made me think that that was the mystery aspect, but it does look very much to me like something that was made with water and some kind of pigment material.
Okay, thank you. So this textured area that we've been wondering about in lots of ways is reminding you of how paint mixed with water acts, that it looks to be fluid. And at any rate, relative to the other forms of image making, it's very different, more organic, you said, more fluid. Thank you. What more can we find? Oh, I think somebody's got the mic here, and then we'll come back up here.
Thanks. Building on this idea of seeing and being seen, I'm wondering about the artist. And so many artists draw self-portraits. So when I look at this, I'm wondering, how much of a self-portrait are we seeing here? So we often don't talk about the artist. We talk about the work.
All right, so you're seeing a human figure and thinking someone made this, and is this a self-depiction? Could this be the artist? And what do you see that makes you say it might be a self-portrait? What about it makes you say that?
Because it's such a distinct face, and it's kind of it's often the pose that self-portrait. When you're drawing a self-portrait, you're kind of looking at yourself and kind of not, and you have this kind of 3/4, and then you kind of look away so that you don't often look like you're looking straight at the mirror.
Thank you. So a couple of things. The genre, you're reminding yourself of the genre of self-portraiture and imagining an artist making it. And then the other is that it's a very distinctive face, so it seems to be a specific person to you. So wondering, could that be the artist? What more can we find?
Yeah, what I'm looking at is with what's going on between their 2 foreheads, or where their brains are. It looks like they're exchanging thoughts and maybe building that bridge together. And it looks like a hand's coming from the a chipmunk and giving him like light or something. That I'm very fascinated by that white spot. It looks like, and a thumb
Here?
No, up there. By his forehead. By the-
Oh, here.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
No,
Thanks.
that's okay.
Yeah.
So
I see.
it's like light or like a thank you, and they're creating something together. Like he needs the acorns for food, and it looks like the man has the acorns, and so he's sharing that and maybe sharing gratitude back. I mean, it's reading a lot into it, but.
Okay, so thinking back to that, that maybe part of this work of art might be about the relationship between these two figures, the human and the animal.
They're creating something together.
Yeah, and you're looking at those lines. We were wondering about materiality and scale, but you're thinking more narratively that these are connective. And for you, this seems to be a kind of channel of communication in a way, or exchange. You noted this looks to you like a light coming from here towards the human, and then maybe the acorns are going here. And so there seems to be a kind of generative, mutual relationship between the two for you. Thank you. Yes.
I have been curious about what emotions might be expressed in each of these creatures. And on the chipmunk, I mean, that's a pose that chipmunks take, but it's very closed body, it's very protective, it's very hunkered down. You know, just looking at it makes me feel like I'm chilly. And the hairs are standing on end, and you know, the eyes are wide, watching out for any kind of threat, and the ears are perked. So it's a defensive pose, or at least that's what I'm projecting into it. And then the man looks, he doesn't look, feel threatened or defensive to me at all. In fact, he's sort of reflective, maybe even proud of. There's a little bit of the smirk that makes me think he has some pride or satisfaction with whatever he has made or is observing. And the acorns and the plants that have been noted make me think it's almost like he is emerging out of the earth, as if somehow the earth has created or evolved this figure, which is, and then you can make a narrative about how that interacts with the animals that are now, you know, in great fear or defensiveness. So that's how far I go. But I was very interested in the emotions that the two characters are portraying.
Right, so thinking about both, you noted emotions and also kind of internal states, how what might be happening with each of them in terms of maybe their thinking. For you, the human looks contemplative. You're also pointing out, adding to this sense of growth, literal soil and growth being part of the human's depiction, that maybe it's coming out of the earth. And then returning to this idea that the animal seems to show a little more tension or anxiety awareness in a different way, with its hunched position and posture and the hair standing on end. So very different states, emotional states potentially between the two. And you pointed out the wide eye, I think, as well. So kind of really pondering, you wondered if he's smirking, but they seem to have a really different both state of awareness and emotional interior life in the moment depicted. Thank you. Let's take maybe one more. What more can we find?
Hi.
Maybe, and then one in the back, two more. Yeah, here.
So I'm just curious, and I'm surprised that no one's brought it up because it's so in your face, which is the soil erg text at the top. And to me, and I know we talked about the one, so it makes me question about whether it's currency or not, but the soil erg makes me, I mean, I don't know what the erg means, but soil makes me think that maybe the material on the image is actually soil, and the artist is using that as the pigment. It seems like, just because it's so prominent, that it's an important piece of the work. And then also the way that it's applied kind of has effects of soil. And then another thing I was just thinking about was the way that the two figures, the animal and the human figure, are sort of floating. And there's no real horizon, there's no real placement and the scale of them together. I just find that interesting. I'm not really sure how to interpret it, but just something else that I was noticing.
Thank you. So pointing out something we haven't really talked about yet, the words up here, soil erg. And you're thinking, it made you think of soil, the word is there.
Yeah.
And you were pondering, we were wondering what kind of material this might be. So connecting this material, potentially this is soil, so that soil could be what we were wondering about earlier is maybe a mystery material. You also are noting there's not a kind of landscape or horizon line, like there's not the composition, the two of them are scaled the same, you're curious about that, and they're not grounded in a horizon line kind of way, like a typical landscape sort of way. And you're curious about this word, erg. Thank you. What more can we find? I'm going to take one more in the back, and then I'll have to stop. Sorry.
It's kind of related. I was really intrigued by the scale of just having a head and then the entire body as one kind of, I don't know if they're connoted as equal. And also the placement of the circles or acorn looking drawings to the left kind of creates some separation between the two figures as well, as one in abundance and the other one with lack. And I think it was interesting also with what one of the other people were saying about seeing and being seen, how maybe seeing is an intellectual act, but being seen is your entire body, and it's beyond just, what might be in the head.
Thank you. So also thinking about scale and placement and bigger themes that this may be conveying. A few things there. You're sort of comparing and finding differences between the depictions on either side. They're all the soil and the acorns. For you, this could be a kind of narrative of abundance and the intellect, that the human figure is doing the looking. We've returned to that a lot, that this contemplative or gazing, the gaze is located here, and then the full body of the animal is being gazed upon. And there's a seems to me maybe a power dynamic or a different relationship. You noted you see fewer acorns over here, and so there seems to be a kind of lack. And then the total figure being looked at sets up a dynamic, potentially, between the two of them for you. Yet, they're compositionally, they're taking up this kind of close amount of space, one to the next. So again, raising that notion of what sort of relationship or theme is being built up between the two figures. Thank you. And I know that we could talk about more, but I'm going to stop you and hand it back to Joel.
So before we go into these questions, are there any brave volunteers who will just kind of reflect on what that felt like to participate in that activity?
Oh, thanks. Okay.
It's really interesting to look at a piece like that through many different interpretations, and to be able to see things in it that maybe we see or we didn't see, and then be able to enter into it through someone else's eyes.
Thank you. Yeah, so the breadth of comments, even in this small group in this short discussion, was very wide, and to get a sense of what other people are feeling and seeing and what you're seeing or not seeing. I think there's a question up here. Can you hand the microphone?
Yeah, I immensely enjoyed it because I was seeing much more afterward, after people spoke, so it felt like a more fuller experience. And I'd like to take all of you next time I go to a museum. Really understand or at least have different experiences and perceptions. So it was awesome.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we're going to transition. These are the parallel of the questions we saw before the exercise. How did you experience yourself, and how did you experience Dabney as a facilitator? Let's go. We've already mentioned a little bit about the self, just a limited time. Let's drill down on Dabney as a facilitator.
Yeah, talk about me. Hear you.
Well, I was concerned about my vocabulary, coming up with ideas about, how to describe things. So I was impressed with Dabney. She came up with different words to describe, and she picked up pretty much all the points that people had mentioned. thought it
Great.
was pretty good.
And so as a facilitator, let me just be explicit about that. She listened carefully. She heard what you said, but then she rephrased it that made you sound even smarter, or put it into into a context. She's very impressive. Yeah, I think there was a comment over here.
This is an answer to both questions. I find myself to be a little judgy of certain interpretations. It was like, oh, the chipmunk is actually looking at the acorn. He's not sad, but very hungry, you know. But to contrast that with Dabney's response to sort of describe the other people's descriptions in a sort of open and way that made him, oh yeah, this is a good interpretation.
Yeah, wonderful. So she described, she paraphrased, but she suspended judgment. She didn't say this is right, this is wrong. And another piece of that is she also linked it to other people's comments. One more comment on Dabney. Yeah, there's one right there.
I was just going to say I really appreciated when you started that stating the fact that there was no perceived or desired outcome of the process. I thought that was very important, just because I think you look at things and you're trying to solve things and perform for the person that's facilitating.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So the sort of open-ended nature of it, that it's not a directed exercise, but a free-flowing exercise. All right, so since we're here talking about the topic, how does this experience connect to science or medicine? You know, something scientific. There are many different types of sciences. But can you think of ways that this might resonate with the sciences?
Did someone, oh.
Yeah. I'll get you one in a second.
Well, we carefully observed, this is on, but we carefully looked at the picture, you know, and we had a group of us looking at the same picture to make sure we weren't missing something.
Good. So the deep looking aspect of it, the going back to actual data, actual observations, and then the pooled observations enriching somehow the experience. There's one comment there, and then right here.
So I thought it had similar aspects of curiosity, observation as medicine, but it went on longer, and I went on deeper into it, and I was able to tolerate the uncertainty, the curiosity, and the ambiguity. In medicine, it's like you're curious, and then about 10 seconds into it, which is on average when we interrupt patients, when we ask them what's going on.
You wait 10 seconds?
On average. And then, but it's curious how it has some elements that are the same, but the tolerance for ambiguity in this exercise and going deeper and deeper felt very different.
Thank you very much.
How it relates to science is you have to take all the evidences in order to do science, because if you leave out things that are really contradictory to your hypothesis, your narrative, then your science really is not robust, so you have to do that. And as for medicine, I would think that we certainly, to some degree, wish, Dabney being our doctor,
Yeah. No, he's way better than I
many times, so the 10 seconds doctors really wonder whether the doctor has heard what we describe, whether the doctor is taking in the evidence we are providing the doctors. Once I had to stop a doctor from running out the door. I said, what about my question? And he said, I don't know. But I said, yes, please tell me, because I need to know that you don't know.
Right.
Because that is part of my evidence to know, well, not everybody knows everything. But if you don't tell me you don't know, I don't know that you don't know.
Right. Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful comments.
Thank you.
And I'm not a scientist, but in my experience, the most creative and the most successful scientists are the ones that focus on the things that don't fit with their hypothesis, in a sense. And so this point is very well taken. And I would say in medical education, what I hear the most from patients is my doctor didn't even know I was in the room. They were staring at the computer the whole time, just entering data, and the visit was 7 seconds or whatever it was that they actually spent with me. So these are great points. I'm sure there are many more, but I know we're running low on time. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, we should move on. But you're reminding me of in our class, all of the physicians that I have the privilege of working with, Joel and many others, talk a lot about that. Having the students think about all aspects of a patient, the context, everything about them, and asking, what do you see that makes you say that, is really, really important to noting and paying attention to, and mitigating your bias with another person. And I think all of us need to do this all the time.
And I'll just add one piece that was very subtle that Dabney did, is where do we start? What was the first thing she said? She said, I want you to just quietly look and don't say anything. And that's one thing I teach the students, is that when the patient's walking into the room, when the patient's sitting there, that's your chance to just look. And it's an important part of what we miss, is that quiet moment of careful looking. And all right.
Yeah, great.
You
Let's see.
that?
So we thought very quickly, if you're curious, we'll walk you through what I was doing. Because one of the things that I think is so important and robust about this methodology, it is very mechanical. I mean, it's not easy to do or anything, but there are techniques to it, and you can learn it, and you can apply it. So it's not Dabney-ness that just led that discussion. I was following a really robust method. So I'm going to quickly, in just 2 or 3 minutes, run you through it. But most of all, we're structuring, stewarding, and holding space for other people. Right? And that's a very demanding role. Joel just mentioned the silence. This is part of VTS. It's essential that we give everyone time to think and look. From wherever they are in their lives and in this moment, whatever meaning they can bring, it's valid. And then I only asked you 3 questions. I think we looked for about 20, 25 minutes at that one piece of art. And I never changed these questions. Okay? The first one I asked only once, what's going on in this picture, to set up. This is an open conversation, and I want to hear from you. It's a signal that I will not tell you what to think. I'm inviting you to think. Right? What's going on in this picture? I only asked it once. For the rest of the 20, 25 minutes, I only asked you 2 questions. This is the second. What do you see that makes you say that? That's that evidence-seeking question, the one with the rigor, the one that helps you mitigate your bias or test your assumption or deepen your reasoning with evidence that everyone can look at and consider for themselves. Right? Very important part of the backbone of VTS. What more can we find is the only other thing I ever asked you. So I toggled back and forth between what do you see that makes you say that, what more can we find? Right? And I'm listening and pointing. So part of the listening is pointing. All that pointing I was doing is part of VTS. I want to make sure I understand what you're looking at and that everyone else can look too. Cannot be underestimated how important it is. And we're doing all of this as facilitators. We're listening first and foremost and really only to understand what this person is saying. So we have to let go of our own ideas about the piece. They're happening, but they're just over here, right? Or any question we may personally want to ask about. Is anybody ever going to talk about the word soil erg? You know, a lot of people would bring. I didn't need to ask that. I trusted that you would find it if you were going to, and believed if you found other things instead, that's important too, right? So we're listening to understand with a lot of curiosity and a lot of compassion, because we have to paraphrase all of it, which is really hard work. Okay, so I have a big cognitive load up here. It's not easy being the facilitator. Some of you have taken our workshops and courses. You have to try to capture and give back what you've heard in hopefully new and different language without changing it. So you're sort of a synthesizer, a clarifier for that person and the group. Everything is heard twice, so everything is really, no comment gets lost, hopefully. Right? And we're also linking, as Joel mentioned, and when I can, I try to frame what you've said. So I try to notice the type of thinking. Like, oh, you're considering materiality, the materials used, the process. You're pulling into narrative and wondering about states of mind. You're thinking about the relationship of this to possible currency, another framework in the world through which you're seeing this image. That's called framing. I also try to keep it all really provisional. I don't say, I don't paraphrase things as facts. I paraphrase them as possibilities. Right? Everything is a new possibility within the conversation. And you noticed this already, and Joel already talked about it, but it's very important that I suspend judgment and don't use my kind of position of power up here as the facilitator leader to inflect or direct or judge anyone in the discussion. I'm genuinely curious. That's that sense of belonging that it's my responsibility to help cultivate through this whole conversation. There is no right or wrong. There's just what do you see that makes you say that, and a deeper consideration. And finally, we persist, as you, Jeremy, I think noted, this is a part of VTS, that we don't stop after 5 minutes or so. So I recorded a discussion about this painting, which is here in Boston. I'm sure some of you have seen it, with 7 people. And I gave each person a color, and I'm not an illustrator like Joel used to be. So I roughly tried to draw the conversation. I just wanted to show what happened. So I listened to the recording, and in the first 7 minutes, 5 people spoke, and they started to agree on one idea, so I just drew a straight line and kept repeating it. And they had looked around this painting, and they were done. You know, they were like, let's move on. Talk about 10 seconds, you know, that sense of we need to move on, the bias toward action, the discomfort with needing to find more. But we hold people in VTS for much longer. And so this is what happens when everyone speaks. And this is a masterpiece of 19th century American art. There's a lot more to it, right? Is this the same group? Yeah, this is the same conversation, even. So this is sort of at the 7-minute mark, and this is at the 25-minute mark. So really, VTS, we're slowing down, we're thinking deeply, we're gathering evidence. It's such a different way of moving through meaning making or data analysis or experiencing another human, a patient, if you will. But you're really slowing down because you're going to get more information and more thinking and more angles and more richness. And you're going to move past the assumptions that might hold you back or keep you in the wrong diagnosis or not help you see the other broken bone, as it were, right? That's one of the examples that we use. So this is a very key part of this method. And we wanted to at least land here for you. And we're going to take questions now. We have some student reflections from our course, if you'd like to read them. These are the sorts of I should have said during the training the I course, we actually do train the students to facilitate VTS discussions. They each practice a couple of times, and there's a lot of growth in terms of them thinking about how they show up and what their responsibility is. And VTS gives them some concrete skills to help them show up a little differently over time. All right, so Deborah, I'll put up our resources page, and then if we want to have questions, that would be great. A little time,
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Are you okay to sit, or do you want to stand? Okay.
So thank you so much. First of all, it's really terrific. I have a long list of comments, but I'll read one and then just open to the floor. And also, you know, great participation, I think, with this group. Really terrific. So let's see. Looking deeply leads to seeing, which leads to thinking. Once you start looking and paying attention to what you are seeing, the world changes, i.e. your perception of the world changes. That increased perception leads to a better standing of it. This is essential for both scientists and artists. By paying attention, artists and scientists alert all of us to do the same. So that's one of my big takeaways. So we can just open up to if anyone has any questions or thoughts or wants to just add anything.
I think, where's the microphone? Is it?
Yeah, do you mind?
I think that might make it easier for people to
I
hear.
can also walk around too. Yeah.
As can I. Oh, there. That's what I was looking for.
Any questions?
I think there's one right over there.
I was just we want to look at that picture and read about it, if you could tell us what it was.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it's in the show, and it's from a series called Soil Erg. And I encourage you, first and foremost, to go look at it.
It's right upstairs, one floor upstairs.
Yeah, and it's here at the list. And look at, it's from a whole series. So now you've looked deeply, you know it a little. So you can go look more and think harder and read about it and look at the rest of the series. It's also in a link online, so I can ask Deborah to maybe share that if you can't get upstairs. The artist's name is Claire Pentecost.
Here, I'll pass. I think.
Oh, hi, Jeremy.
Go ahead.
So I was really struck that what was going on when we did the activity was both an individual experience but a group experience. And I wasn't just looking at Claire Pentecost's image. I was listening to other people engage with the image. What they said interacted with how I made sense of the image. So it was a little bit like a theater piece, and it was a co-creative experience. And I've heard this described, I've never been through this, and it's just totally different going through it as a group, and I felt connected to the group experience. And I'm wondering if anybody else felt that, and I also wonder if this is part of the magic of this.
Beautifully put. Did anybody else feel that?
I did.
A lot of hands and nods. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's a central part of it, and it applies very directly to the skills we're trying to teach in terms of communication, observation, whatever it is. And then I would say I would add a third piece to that is the individual experience, the group experience, and then the experience of learning how to lead the group is also, I think, a next level that is really a powerful next step. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just think that it goes back to that balance between cultivating belonging, which it has to be cultivated constantly, right? I mean, it's not like we just declare, oh, everybody belongs and we're all psychologically safe. Rather than saying those things, we have to create those conditions. And it does that beautifully, but at the same time that we're learning, right? Because your mind is changing, and you're cognitively growing. There is cognitive growth slowly over time through these discussions. And I agree that the next level step is to try to facilitate and create that discussion, which we do with the students. Thank you for that beautiful way of putting it.
And it's a good point to give a little pitch is that we teach a course to train leaders, people who want to use this in whatever domain of science or education or any other area. There's a course that you can sign up for.
Here, yeah. Get in touch with me. We're teaching it through Harvard Medical School. It's a VTS training course, very similar to one that Corinne Zimmerman and I teach now with business, but we're going to focus it on healthcare, all kinds of work within healthcare and science. So please reach out. It starts next September. Thanks for remembering to do that.
I think we have time for maybe two more, and Mags is.
Well, mine's a little kind of from the patient end. What do you know, it's great to do this with doctors, but doctors are on a schedule. And, how can you actually, as a patient, facilitate some of this?
Well, that's a great question. That's a big question and a critical question. I would say that one of our team building activities that we do, Corinne Zimmerman, who's just mentioned, does these team building sessions. And we do interact with patients before and after the team has done it. And anecdotally, they notice a big difference. Just in terms of the attention they get, the diminution in disagreements or confusion, the improved communication that happens. Your question's a different question, which is what can a patient do? Go to the museum for sure. And talk to your doctors. That's the most important thing. The best lessons I learned were the hardest ones too. When patients have said, I tried to reach you and I couldn't. That's not acceptable. Or, did you notice you were doing this and not this? And I encourage and I empower patients to speak directly with your providers of all stripes, not just doctors.
I do think that participating in VTS and learning it helps people be brave. We encourage people to use the skills independently. Meaning you don't have to just facilitate a whole VTS discussion, but by practicing this, you learn to ask, well, what are you experiencing that makes you say that? Or tell me more about what you're saying about me. And you can paraphrase back what your doctor's saying and see if you understand it and make them wait and listen. Is this what you're saying to me? And you learn to paraphrase. There's different levels of listening and communication that are built up that are very applicable on both sides of those kinds of power dynamics. One last quick thought on that, because we're kind of talking about hierarchy and power, right? Where there's a doctor and a patient. Over time, this experience, it helps groups become more horizontal. As you were referring to earlier, so the resident speaks up during VTS and the senior physician listens because they sort of forget all the structure around them. And I think it's, I don't know, when we teach it in our courses, I always talk a little bit about being a patient and learning to hold your own if you can.
And we do bring patients into the course. We had to stall that during COVID. And we ask each patient at the end to share their own personal story. And I'll just mention one thing about Harvard. When we first proposed this idea 20 years ago, we were rejected soundly. They said, this is ridiculous. Everyone will be embarrassed if we do this. So we actually took a small group and we studied it and we showed that it was effective. And then they begrudgingly granted us permission to offer it. And then I knew we were successful. About 10 years later, they put it on the cover of the Harvard Alumni magazine and the recruitment. So I said, I guess somebody thinks it's a good idea. And now it's actually required there's a VTS portion for every year of medical school that's now required for all the students. It's not going to solve every problem for sure, but I think it's a progress.
Yeah, I think may have been somebody before, but can I just follow up quickly in response to this? I think there's two things. There's talking about what you actually perceive the phenomenon and then the interpretation of it, and that I feel like in medicine and science there's a difference between doing that because there is something called trained judgment, right? Somebody who's been in a field longer has more experience in seeing something in a very different way than a novice does. So I don't know how a group navigates that in a place like this. We are all sort of novices, right? But in a medical setting, there is a right answer and there is a wrong answer, and that could mean life or death for somebody, right?
Yeah, that's true. But what I think it does is it keeps the conversation open, and everyone can learn. Everyone can learn. It doesn't, that doesn't mean the junior person has the right answer, but at least they feel heard, and then they can understand the decision-making process. And experience comes, judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from making mistakes. And so that's all going to happen in parallel, but getting the senior and the junior and the even more junior in the same room, but on a parallel level, I think can do nothing but help the communication.
It's also one quick thing about expertise, sorry.
No,
You're making me think about some of the business groups I work with, and I just trained 600 IT engineers in VTS, and they were always like, well, everybody understands me, everybody knows what I think, or I'm really senior and I'm right. There's very instinctive responses, and they learned, wait, it can be really helpful to those junior people to hear your thinking. What have you experienced that makes you say what you're thinking? It's not devaluing seniority or expertise, it's giving access to the thinking. And also, they sometimes need to hear from junior people who have better ideas.
I know it's late, but there's one very patient
Okay,
person in the back that's been asking.
last question, and then we are running over time.
Yeah, this might be more of an analytical question, but I can see in science fields how this is very useful, but is there ever a concern that sometimes you might be teaching them to be very thoughtful and observant, so when time is of the essence, you may not arrive at a conclusion that might be, optimal in time, essentially, and you might need more time to process and observe and get your right answer.
Right. Well, that's a great question. I'll take a stab at that. There is this so-called type 1 and type 2 thinking, the sort of rapid response reflex thinking that has to happen. And then there's a different type of thinking, which is slow, circular, reassessing. And in medicine, at least, I'll speak in medicine, is they're used in very different settings. This is not what you do in a code situation. When someone's having a code, you reach for the tube and you reach for the paddles and you do what needs to be done immediately. So this is not meant to replace that. It's sort of, I would say, meant to supplement that. And we, again, keep things very open, and there's not a right answer or wrong answer. It's more the thought process of observing and testing those observations and measuring your own bias and looking for additional information that you might have missed before you make a conclusion.
So I think we will leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you all
really
for coming.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody.
Thanks to all.